Hello everybody. Glad to be with you again. Today we continue your exploration of this month's theme, which is about play and our spiritual relationship to it. You might be surprised to learn that there has been a good deal of study about play in the life of adults. And some of it has indeed been focused on the spirituality of play. Margaret Gunther was the director of the Center of Christian Spirituality at the General Theological Seminary in New York City. She wrote many books on the navigation of the spiritual pathway, and she spoke of how we craft our spiritual lives, much as a weaver crafts a piece of cloth. She believed that in the process of crafting our lives, we must have a rule about self-care so that our spirituality doesn't become heavy and joyless or self-denying or self-centered. And to that end, she advocated the role of true play as a rule of life. She said that in the second half of our lives, we shouldn't give it up. We shouldn't let the ability to play, our inborn gift of play, to atrophy and wither away, or we'll become heavy in our spiritual attitude. Play exists for its own sake, she said. And when we play, she said, we also celebrate holy uselessness. Holy, H-O-L-Y, uselessness. I love that definition. I love the description, like a perfect description of a trip to Disneyland or a weekend day spent leveling up in my favorite video game or 15 minutes of uncontrollable laughter. This happened just to me just this past week. I was texting with my niece, her favorite form of communication. And our conversation became so convoluted because, and this may have happened to you before, we were crossing paths. We were out of sync with each other and we were answering and saying things on top of each other, and it was starting to make no sense at all. And I started laughing, and I was laughing so hard I couldn't text anymore. I couldn't type. And then I decided to call because I'm thinking, April's going to think that I have just gone senile because nothing was making any sense. And so I called, and then I was laughing so hard that it made her laugh. And we literally laughed for about 10 to 15 minutes, just about the ridiculousness of our conversation. Holy uselessness. And it was so much fun. And it felt so good. So do you carve out time and space for play? It may seem totally disconnected from what you label as spiritual in your life, but actually as a spiritual being having a human experience, your whole life is spiritual. Every success is a spiritual success, and every obstacle is a spiritual challenge. So tying your shoelaces, cleaning the toilet, making lunch, driving, typing, watching the wind blow, all these things are spiritual. American philosopher Dallas Willard once wrote that God is most joyful being in the universe. And if the goal of our faith is to fully live as a being created in the image and likeness of God, shouldn't we seek experiences that bring us joy and that connect us with what the Bible calls the joy of God? And if all of life is spiritual and God is joy, don't we want to make time for play? Because play is a spiritual practice, much like prayer and meditation or truth-seeking or service. Spiritual practices are simply things that help us to create God space. They focus our hearts and minds on God. Spiritual practices direct our thoughts away from anxiety and self-obsession. from heavy things in the world like natural disasters, disease, violence, and cultural strife. Play doesn't ignore or diminish the significance of these things, nor the pain that comes about because of them. But when we choose to play for an hour or two, we can place these things firmly in the hands of Spirit, trusting them to God for a while. When we play, it's like handing everything over to Spirit to hold so we can decompress. So take a minute and consider, what is it that you need to let God hold so that you can freely play for a while? If you still feel like you have to, you can take it back when you're done. Hopefully, though, with a bit of tension and stress gone, you'll have a fresh perspective about just how capable God is of holding on to anything that you might have. There are obvious benefits to play and the conscious commitment to a regular dose of it. First, it's a way to put us in a space to create. One of the things play does is to put us in a magical space of creativity. We can forget who we are in real life and create this beautiful world right here and now. It gives us something to experiment with and to try out. It helps us try out new ideas. It possibly gives us a chance to try out something we'll use later in life. So when I was looking at the studies of play in the lives of adults and how it could be spiritual, one of the things that pretty much all of them do is a play history. Because play history, if you analyze how a person played as a child, it tells you a lot about them as an adult. So I had already kind of realized this about my play. When I was a child, I wasn't an only child in reality, but my one brother was so much older than I didn't really have much contact with him, and he was gone and married by the time I was 10 years old. So I lived the life pretty much of a single child in the home. And my mother was a little bit ahead of her time, and she worked out of the home. And so when I started to school, she wouldn't be home when I got out of school. So I walked and yes, we walked in those days. We didn't ride the bus. It's like many years ago. I would walk to her workplace. And my mom happened to work in a union hall. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with union halls, but they had just what it sounded like. There was an office that she worked in, but attached to it was this big meeting room. I mean, big, and to a little child, like a first or second grader, it was really a big room. And it had a platform in front, and it had lots of folding chairs, and that became my playground. So every day after school, and then in summer, all summer long, that was where I played. And I just got to use my imagination, and I created scenarios, I created plays, I created all kinds of activities and all kinds of people, lots of imaginary people, all of whom I told what to do. And I managed them, and I fixed things, and I just did everything. I had just a wonderful time. It is a very positive memory for me. And I realized that later on, this came back to visit me in high school and college. I had to do real work on self-esteem and self-love. I had real issues in this area, and I became really interested in music, choir activities, and drama. And I was in every play that was ever put on at school, in both high school and college. Sometimes I played a lead role. Sometimes I worked backstage. I was just there all the time. And I loved it. And I loved the whole idea of it. Very similar to the things I created back in that meeting hall. And then later on, I did many things, and I enjoyed many of the jobs I had. But the one now that I look back on that I loved the very most in my whole career was worship coordinator at Unity of Phoenix. Now, there are a couple of reasons for this. I felt called to do that, and there's nothing like a calling to create pure passion for your work. But the other reason was it brought to bear everything that I had learned and done in my whole career and all of that play history. Because being worship coordinator in a church that size is pretty much like being a producer. And so I had to put all the pieces together, the sound, the ministers, the music, the worship team, 50 ushers and greeters, three services on a Sunday. In all the holidays, I had to decorate the stage. It was just, I loved it. Long hours, low pay, and I never felt one moment of stress because it was like play. It was just the most fun I've ever had in a job, and I loved it. And of course, all the other perks that go with working in a spiritual type position were there. So I'm saying to you, even as an adult, your play can communicate with and help you navigate the rest of your life, your spiritual life. The next benefit that you get from play is you tap into something deep within. It helps us to get in touch with our inner self. When we play, we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, which is a big part of being authentic in our spirituality. Our spiritual practices don't need to be rigid or cold. In fact, I don't think they should be rigid and cold. And if you feel like they are, I recommend you get some new spiritual practices, and play might be one of them. Using play as a vehicle to transport us spiritually can be so enlightening and so lightening of the spirit and mind. It reminds us of the benefit of knowing all the time the divinity and joy of life. And third, play can be almost anything. From riding a bike to accounting to a trip to Disneyland. My best friend, though I find it really hard to understand, loved cleaning the house. Others play musical instruments or sports, and some have hobbies or crafts. And maybe it's gardening or golfing for you. And you may be wondering why I put accounting in there, because I loved accounting. I didn't want to be an accountant, but I loved it so much that both in high school and in college, I kept taking accounting courses. They were never required of me, even in my MBA, but I got to take some electives and I took accounting. And I just loved that whole double entry thing and making it balance and playing with the numbers. And to this day, I do my own taxes. I know some people think it's crazy. No accounting for taste. No pun intended. So it's often a matter of just seeing the spiritual side of what you're doing and considering play. The next question, as always, is how we make play a spiritual practice. How do we experience it this way? Of course, you have to choose it, but there's more to it than that. It's called a practice for a reason. It's a process and it takes time. And once you've learned to do this play activity, if it's a new one for you, you practice allowing yourself to get better at it and not always get it right. And finally, you feel really good at it. So you will choose over and over again to allow play to remind you of the joy and divinity of life. And that's how it becomes a practice. The starting point is setting an intention for playing to be fun and for it to remind you of life, that life is spiritual. And it can be as simple as saying, today I choose to play as a way to know the joy in life. Whatever you choose as your intention, make it your own and in your own words. And then choose it at least once every day. Don't make your fun or joy dependent on anyone else. There are some things that you obviously can do with other people. For instance, if we could go to the movie right now, which we can't, we could go with someone else. But we shouldn't let not having someone else to go with us keep us from going there if it gives us joy. So start making a list of things you already enjoy and then list the things you would like to try. And to keep it fresh, change it up frequently with the practices. If you feel self-conscious about friends or neighbors seeing you in a silly or childlike activity, then don't do it in front of friends and neighbors. Or if you enjoy making an impression on people, try to remember that the purpose of this practice is to experience joy, not to impress others. In this playtime, remember the intention. Smile and laugh a lot and let it open you up. Open you up for a while and remind you of the love and beauty everywhere. Be patient with yourself. If you miss a day, just pick it up again tomorrow. And before bedtime, take a minute to remember how you played that day. So you get the idea about how to make play a spiritual practice. I hope you'll consider doing that. It will enrich your life. As an adult, you have every right to enjoy yourself. So kick off your spiritual play practice with some of these ideas. So George Bernard Shaw said, we don't stop playing because we grow old. We grow old because we stop playing. And of course, I can't create a talk without an Eric Butterworth quote. And this time I'd like to read a paragraph from Unity of All Life. This is a book I ran across when I was looking for something else, which is, by the way, one of the best ways to find something good while you're looking for something else. So in a chapter called From Static to Dynamic Living, this is what Eric Butterworth says. Do you feel that you are truly living? Or is there a vague feeling that you are simply existing from day to day? Does your work seem monotonous and hold little interest for you? Is your life beset with ruts and routines, with the dull and the humdrum? Then you should do something about it. Locked within you is the potential for full, meaningful, creative, and dynamic living. Few people actually discover this hidden capacity, and that's the tragedy of life. A few can touch the magic string, and noisy fame is proud to win them. Alas for those that never sing, but die with all their music in them. Stuart Chase once sat down to figure the calendar of his days. He had the feeling that there is an ascending scale of human values, and somewhere on it, there is a line between living and mere existing. So he asked himself, how many hours of the week had he truly lived? And how many had he simply existed? He discovered after some honest self-examination that out of 168 hours of the week, he had been alive only 40 hours, or about 25% of the total time. Contrast this with the zest for living of the little child who can hardly wait to get out to play in the morning. The great gift of the joy of living is at its zenith at this stage of life. Each new day is an adventure. The child lives each moment with what someone has called frolic health. He is full of wonder, curiosity, and an absorbing interest in every experience he can understand and assimilate. So that's the key. And if you can't think of anything else to do for play, get a kid and let them direct the play. They know how to do it, and it's a lot of fun. And from the Bible, the Message version, Jesus in Matthew 11:30. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. When we play, when we enjoy the fullness of life and its curiosities and fun, when we don't take ourselves too seriously, as Reverend Neil said earlier in this month, play is like praying. Like prayer, laughter and play can be healing to the body, mind, and soul. And laughter and play are holy things. When we play, we leave behind the daily stressors and allow our spirit to breathe and restore. I hope this has given you some ideas of how to incorporate more play in your life, and most of all, how to use it as a spiritual practice, and that you will learn to appreciate the holy uselessness and the freedom of joy in everyday play. Thank you.
Thank you, Betty Bennett. You have challenged us. You have given us new insight. And I want to go out and try and put it to work today. So thank you. We so much appreciate what you have brought to us.